Wyoming Territory, January 1883, the kind of cold that made the bones ache settled over the plains, and by nightfall the wind carried a warning sharp enough to split wood. Nella Oakes had not meant to run. Not that far. Not that late. Not with barely more than a threadbare shawl and a pair of worn-out boots. But when the shouting started again in the house, her uncle's drunken voice, the sound of glass breaking, she had grabbed her bag and ran into the dark. She had not stopped until the lights from the main road were far behind her, and her lungs burned like dry tinder. She had no plan. Just get away. The snow had started an hour later. Her thin dress clung to her knees, soaked from where she had stumbled through a frozen creek bed. Her hands had gone numb. She had followed the fence line until she saw a weather-worn barn on the edge of a snow-covered field. No house nearby, just that barn, its doors half open like it was waiting for her. She had climbed inside and buried herself in the hay at the back, curling into herself, shivering so hard her teeth clacked. That was where he found her. Cade Zeller had spent the last 15 hours helping a neighbor pull a wagon free from a ditch, and by the time he rode back to his ranch, the snow had turned into a full-blown squall. He had nearly passed the old barn before something made him stop a horse's uneasy whinny, or maybe just instinct. He dismounted, lantern in hand, and stepped inside. "Hello." His voice was steady, low, but not cold. "Anyone in here?" There was nothing at first, just the creak of the rafters and the groan of wind under the eaves, then a rustle in the hay. He raised the lantern. She pushed herself up weakly, her face pale and lips blue. Her eyes met his, scared but still sharp. "Please," her voice cracked. "Do not send me back." Cade set the lantern on a beam and stepped closer. His coat was heavy wool, lined with sheepskin. Without a word, he shrugged it off and laid it gently over her shoulders, careful not to startle her. "You are freezing," he said. "You need heat, not hay. I just needed somewhere to stop." Her fingers trembled as she held the coat around her. "You are lucky you did not stop for good." "Come on." He reached out his hand. "I have a fire going in the house, warm food, dry clothes." She hesitated, then nodded. He helped her up, slow and steady. Her legs buckled, but he caught her. "I am Cade," he said. "Cade Zeller, my land, my barn. You are safe here." "Nella," she whispered. "Nella Oakes." He held her steady as they walked through the snow. The wind cut like knives, but his arm was firm around her, keeping her upright. The house was not far, a simple two-room cabin with smoke curling from the chimney and yellow light spilling from the window. Inside, it was warm. A fire crackled in the hearth. Cade guided her to a chair near it, then disappeared into the other room. When he returned, he had a folded blanket, a bowl of stew, and a pair of thick socks. "Eat slow," he said, setting the bowl in her lap. "You are half frozen." She looked up at him, her eyes glassy. "Why are you helping me?" He knelt beside her, pressing the blanket around her shoulders. "Because I would not sleep tonight knowing someone was out in that barn, shivering in the hay." A tear slipped down her cheek. She did not wipe it away. After she ate, she fell asleep in the chair, curled under the blanket like a cat trying to stay small. Cade watched her for a moment, then stoked the fire higher and settled into the chair across from her. He stayed awake most of the night, just in case she woke up afraid. Morning came slow and pale. Snow drifted against the windows. Nella stirred, blinking into the light. Cade was already up, frying eggs in a pan, his back to her. "You are still here," she said softly. He turned, glanced at her with a quiet smile. "So are you." Nella sat up straighter. "I should go." "Where?" She had no answer. He carried a plate over and set it beside her. "Eat first, then we can figure that out." She looked at the plate, then at him. "You do not even know me." "I know enough," he said. "You were shivering in my barn." "That is plenty." She stared down at the eggs, and her throat worked as she swallowed hard. "Thank you," she whispered. Cade's eyes met hers. "You are safe now, Nella." The words hit something deep inside her. She nodded but said nothing more. That afternoon, he showed her the ranch, the empty barn stalls, the frozen creek, the old corral he had been mending. She followed him quietly, pulling his coat tighter around her. She was still pale, still cautious, but her eyes moved over everything like she was memorizing it. "You do all this alone?" she asked. "I do. No wife." "No, why not?" He looked at her. "Never found one who wanted to stay." She said nothing, but her fingers brushed the fence post beside her like she was grounding herself. That night she stayed inside. He gave her the bed, took the chair again. "I do not want to push you out," she said. "You are not," he said. "You need the rest." She looked at him for a long moment. "You are kind," he shrugged. "Just decent." She smiled faintly. "That is rare." Cade watched her as she fell asleep again. Something tightened in his chest. Not pity, not obligation, hope. The next morning she helped him feed the horses. Her hands were clumsy with the feed buckets, but she tried. She kept glancing at him when she thought he was not looking. "You planning to keep hiding out in my barn forever?" he asked softly. She flushed. "No." "Then stay here, in the house. Help me with the ranch if you want work." Her breath caught. "You mean it?" "I do," she nodded slowly. "I will earn my keep, I promise." He smiled. "I believe you." And just like that, something shifted between them. No declarations. Just two people standing in the cold, beginning something neither of them had planned on, but both of them needed, and neither of them wanted to walk away from it. By the end of the third day, Nella had found her rhythm in the quiet duties Cade left unspoken, but needed doing. She mended a tear in a saddle blanket without being asked, boiled water for coffee before he returned from checking the far pasture, and began keeping a small pile of kindling stacked near the stove without comment. She moved through the cabin with a kind of careful watchfulness, as though waiting for something to collapse that never quite did. Cade noticed, though he said little. Late in the afternoon, while the sky turned the color of steel wool and the cold settled deeper into the floorboards, he returned from the woodpile with a split log under each arm to find her standing at the washbasin, sleeves rolled to the elbow, scrubbing the grime from a tin kettle with a rag that had once been a flour sack. "You do not need to do that," he said, setting the wood down near the stove. "I know," she said, not turning, "but it needed doing." He leaned on the back of a chair, watching her. Her hair had dried into soft waves since the snow, and the way she stood back straight, shoulders squared, reminded him of someone who'd learned to take up as little space as possible, but was beginning to forget why. "You always take on other folks' chores?" he asked. She rinsed the kettle, then set it upside down to dry. "Only when I want to stay." His throat tightened, but he kept his voice even. "You got somewhere better?" She looked over her shoulder, met his eyes. "Not better, just nowhere." He didn't answer. Instead, he nudged the kettle further from the edge of the table so it wouldn't fall. That evening she sat near the fire, darning a sock of his that had worn thin at the heel. He hadn't asked her to. He wouldn't have. But she had found the basket of mending tucked behind the stove and simply begun. He turned a spoonful of beans in the pan. "You sew like you were taught by someone with a sharp tongue." "My aunt," she said, threading the needle again. "She didn't believe in waste or loose stitches." "You miss her." "I miss who she was before her husband died." She didn't look up. After that, she wasn't the same. Cade stirred the pan twice more before replying. "Grief changes people." "I know." She bit the end of the thread. "Sometimes it makes them cruel." He brought the pan to the table, slid a plate toward her. "And sometimes it makes them careful." Nella set the sock aside and picked up her fork. "Which are you?" He didn't answer right away. "I'm trying to be the kind that lets a person breathe." That night, the wind picked up again, rattling the shutters in their frames. Cade was stacking the last of the split wood by the hearth when he glanced back and saw her standing by the window, watching the snow drift sideways across the dark. "That barn," she said. He turned to her. "What about it? I thought I'd die in it." "You didn't. Because of you." She looked at him, her voice quiet. "You didn't have to stop. Most wouldn't have." He crossed the room, not close enough to crowd her, just enough to be heard over the wind. "I don't know how to leave someone out in the cold. You've been alone a long time." He looked out the window beside her. "Some folks are easier with silence than company." She studied his face like she was seeing it without the weight of frost and fear between them. "You don't strike me as a man who minds company, just one who doesn't expect it to stay." He didn't shift his gaze. "You're not wrong." "I'm not going anywhere," she said. He turned to her slowly. "I don't want you to." The fire cracked behind them. Neither moved. "I'm tired of running," she said. "Then don't." "I don't know what comes next." Cade took a slow breath. "We figure it out together if you want that." She nodded once. "I do." He reached for her hand. She let him. Her fingers were warm, now calloused at the tips, but steady. Outside, the wind howled across the empty fields, but inside, the cabin held fast. The firelight danced across the walls, and for the first time in a long while, Nella didn't brace for the floor to fall out from under her. She just stood there, her hand in his, and let the stillness settle. The snow held for 4 more days. It softened the world into a hush, the kind that made every footstep feel like a choice. Nella moved through the cabin like she belonged, though she never called it hers. Cade noticed the way she kept her own corner of the table tidy, how she folded his shirts with the sleeves tucked inward, how she paused sometimes at the door before stepping into the cold, like she was remembering not to fear it. One morning she stood at the stove stirring cornmeal into a bubbling pot while he pulled on his coat. He'd mentioned the north fence line needed checking, and she turned toward him once, then looked back at the pot. "You ever thought of hiring someone on?" she asked. He paused, one hand on the doorframe. "You offering?" "No," she said, glancing at him, "but you'll need help come spring. Lot of ground to cover, I manage." She gave a low sound, not quite laughter, not quite disbelief. "Meaning you work yourself half to death and call it managing?" He leaned his weight into the frame. "You think I can't? I think you don't have to." "You offering again?" She met his eyes. "Not for wages." He crossed to her slowly. The room held the scent of boiling oats and ash from the fire. He rested a hand on the counter beside her. "I wouldn't take your help for granted." "I know that," she said. He studied her a moment longer, then reached for his gloves. "I'll be back before dusk. Be careful past the creek run. Ice there's thin." That stopped him. "You been out that far?" She nodded. "Yesterday. Took the long route back with the eggs. There's a trail east of the cottonwoods, safer footing." He nodded once. "Good to know." By the time the sun dipped behind the ridge, he was back, boots caked in snow, shoulders heavy with cold. She was slicing carrots by lantern light, a pot of broth already simmering. The cabin smelled of thyme and smoke. He stomped the snow from his boots and hung his coat near the fire. "Your trail was better. Saved me near half an hour." She didn't look up. "Told you it was." He stepped closer. "You always this stubborn?" "Only when I'm right." He reached past her to grab a cup from the shelf. "Then I expect I'll be hearing a lot of it." She handed him a spoon. "You'll survive." That night after dinner, she pulled a worn book from her bag. It was small, the leather cover cracked at the spine, and she opened it with the kind of care most folks gave a Bible. Cade glanced up from oiling his saddle. "What's that?" "Ledger of sorts," she said, running her finger down the page. "Recipes, bits of advice, things my mother wrote down before she passed." He set the tin of oil aside. "You read it often?" "Every winter, some springs too." Was she a practical woman? She was quiet. But she knew how to keep bread from falling and when to plant onions by the moon. Nella traced a line on the page, her voice soft. She once wrote down how to calm a spooked horse with just your voice. Does it work? Did for her. He leaned forward. Read me something. She hesitated, then turned a few pages. Here, if you're lucky enough to find a good man, don't wait for him to speak first. Let your hands tell him. Hands don't lie. Cade looked at her, the fire casting gold across her cheek. He didn't move, didn't speak. She closed the book gently. Later, as the fire burned low and the wind quieted to a whisper, she stood by the window again. He joined her, his shoulder just brushing hers. You ever think about leaving again? He asked. She didn't answer right away. Not once since the day I woke up warm. He turned to her. Do your hands lie? She looked at him, her eyes steady. No. He reached for her, then not sudden, not eager, just sure. His palm found hers and she held on, neither pulled away, neither needed to. The storm had long passed. But in that room, something had settled stronger than snow, something that would not melt come spring. The thaw came slow but earnest. Mud pressed up through the snowbank edges, and the creek behind the barn whispered beneath its thinning ice. Morning still bit the fingers, but the sun lingered longer now, and the light through the cabin window came with a gentler hue. Nella stood outside the henhouse, her apron dusted with straw, watching a red-tailed hawk circle above the ridge. She held the egg basket in one arm, her other hand shading her eyes. Cade approached from the pasture, coat half open, leather gloves tucked in his belt. You see it? She asked, without turning. Been circling since breakfast, he said, stopping beside her. Might be a nest up in the pines. I never saw hawks back home, only crows, loud, hungry things. He glanced at her. Where was home? She adjusted the basket. Outside of Crescent, Kansas. A little clapboard house with a pump that froze every winter. My father ran cattle for a man who never paid on time. My mother taught the neighbor girls their letters. When she passed, I stayed long enough to bury her proper, then I left. Cade didn't speak. The hawk dipped lower, wings wide and slow. I thought about going south, she added. Maybe Texas. But I didn't know a soul there, so I kept walking. You always meant to keep going, she lowered her hand, finally looking at him. At first, but something in me gave out along the way. The cold just finished what the rest started. He nodded, quiet. You don't talk like someone who quits easy. I don't, but I was worn thin. She shifted the basket from one hip to the other. I've been thinking I might plant a few things this spring, if you've a spare patch near the shed. There's a good bit of earth along the southern fence, he said. Gets sunlight well into the afternoon. I'd need to clear the stones. I'll help, she smiled, soft and brief. I figured you might. They walked back toward the house, boots leaving deep prints in the softening earth. A breeze moved through the bare cottonwood limbs overhead. That evening, Cade brought in a stack of tanned hides from the shed and laid them across the table. He began cutting them with a practiced hand, measuring with string and folding the edges with care. Nella watched from across the room, her sewing basket open on her lap. What are you making? She asked. New reins. The old ones cracked down the middle last week. She set her needlework aside and crossed to the table. You've done leatherwork long, since I was 15. My uncle taught me. Said a man ought to be able to fix what breaks in his own hands. She touched one of the strips. This is elk. Traded for it last fall, stronger than deer hide. He handed her a square of it, already cut. Want to try? She took it, surprised by the weight. What do I do? He showed her how to fold the strip, how to set the stitch through the edge using a bone awl. Her fingers were steady, and though the first line wobbled, the second held true. That's better than my first try, he said. Maybe I just had a better teacher. He looked at her then, his expression open in a way it hadn't been when she first arrived. You learning how to stay? She finished the seam before answering. I think I've stopped wondering if I should leave. He nodded once, like that was answer enough. Later, after the lamps were turned low and the fire burned soft beneath the ash, Nella stood in the doorway of the back room, her braid over one shoulder. "You ever think about what comes next?" she asked. Cade straightened from where he'd been banking the coals. "You mean after the snow's gone?" "I mean after this. After the quiet wears off and spring brings the rest of the world back in." He stood fully, brushing his palms together. "I think about you in the garden patch and me fixing the barn roof. I think about a second chair on the porch. I think about not eating alone." She stepped into the room, her bare feet silent on the floorboards. "You ever think about asking me to stay for good?" He didn't move toward her. "Do you want me to?" Her voice didn't waver. "I do." He crossed the space between them. He didn't touch her yet, just stood close enough that she could feel the warmth off his skin. "I've had it in my mind for days," he said, "but I didn't want to speak before you were ready to hear it." "I was ready the day I saw your coat in my lap," she said. His hand came up then, brushing her cheek. She leaned into it. "I want to build something here," he said. "With you, not just days passing, but a life worth keeping." She reached for him, lacing her fingers into his. "Then let's begin." And they did right there, no fanfare, no need for vows spoken under church rafters. Just two hearts choosing the same path, in the stillness of a Wyoming night, beneath the watchful hush of melting snow. By early April, the last crusts of snow retreated into the shadows beneath the trees, and Cade's land stretched open like a held breath finally let go. The cottonwoods showed the faintest green at their tips, and the creek ran full and quick, carrying winter's remains down into the valley. Nella stood in the south field with her sleeves rolled and a spade in her hand. The patch she'd cleared was a mess of turned earth and scattered stones, but it was hers. A row of onion sets waited in a tin pail beside her, and her boots sank a little with every step she took. Cade came from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. "You've got near straight lines," he said, nodding toward the furrows. "I marked them with twine," she said. "Didn't trust my eye." He stepped closer, squinting at the rows. "Twine or not, you've got a better hand than most." She leaned on the spade. "You think I could put in beans along the edge? North side will get less sun come June," he said. "But if you keep them watered, they'll do." She nodded, thoughtful. "Then I'll try." Cade watched her brush loose hair back from her brow with the back of her wrist, her skin streaked with dirt, and her mouth set in that quiet way she had when she was focused. "You've taken to this place," he said. "I didn't mean to," she replied. "It just happened slow." He stepped beside her, looking over the land. "You've changed things here." She turned toward him. "So have you." Their eyes held for a long moment, but the wind picked up and she turned back to her rows. "I want to build a fence around the garden," she said. "Keep the deer out." "I can help with that," she smiled, faint and sure. "I know." Cade built the fence in 3 days, and Nella painted the gate with leftover whitewash from the shed. She scratched a date into the bottom rail with her pocket knife. April 1883. When he noticed, he didn't ask why. He only added his initials beside hers. On the 4th morning, a letter arrived, delivered by a boy on a mule who worked his way along the scattered homesteads once a week. It was addressed in a shaky hand to Nella Oakes. She sat on the porch steps, the letter folded in her lap long before she opened it. Cade didn't ask, but she spoke anyway. "My aunt passed." The neighbor wrote. "Said she took sick not long after I left." He sat beside her. "I'm sorry, she was hard," Nella said. "But she raised me when no one else would." He watched the wind shift her braid over her shoulder. "I thought I'd feel more," she added, "but I think I grieved her already." They sat in silence a moment. Finally, she said, "There's no one left back there. You don't have to go back." "I won't," she said. "Not now, Not ever. That evening she brought out a quilt she'd finished stitching and draped it over the bed. The pattern was simple triangles in faded reds and browns, but the seams were clean. She ran her hands over it as Cade stood in the doorway. "I stitched the corners with oak leaves," she said. "So it stays rooted." He crossed the room, his voice roughened by something quiet. "You planning to stay in this room?" She met his eyes. "I was hoping to share it." He didn't speak. He just reached for her hand and held it steady. The next Saturday, they rode into town with a crate of eggs and a basket of early greens. Folks at the mercantile asked about the woman who'd come with Zeller, and he only said her name with a certainty that silenced gossip before it began. Nella traded for a bolt of calico and a new pair of boots. On the way home, they stopped by the riverbank and ate bread and cheese under a cottonwood whose roots curled into the water. "I never thought I'd have a life like this," she said, watching the water move. "You built it," he said. "With your own hands." She looked at him. "We did." Summer came with thunder and wildflowers. Cade built a second stall in the barn for a horse they bought from a passing trader. Nella named him Samson, and he followed her like a dog. They canned beans together, hung lavender to dry from the rafters, and carried buckets of creek water when the rains held off too long. One warm night in August, they sat on the porch with their bare feet on the rail. The stars came out slow, and the only sound was the hum of crickets and the creak of wood settling. "I've been thinking," Cade said, his voice low. She turned toward him. "About what?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring, plain silver, shaped by hand, smooth at the edges. "About making this last." She stared at it, then at him. "Are you asking?" "I am." She reached for his hand and slid the ring onto her own finger. "Then yes." He kissed her with the same quiet steadiness he'd offered since the day he found her half frozen in the barn. They married at the edge of the garden, under the cottonwoods. No preacher, just the two of them and a promise spoken plain. She wore her mother's locket and he wore his best shirt. Afterward, they shared bread and coffee and danced barefoot in the grass until the moon rose. Years passed slow and full. They added a second room to the cabin and planted plum trees along the edge of the pasture. In the winters, they read aloud by the fire. In the summers, they slept with the windows open and the scent of sage drifting in. Their love was never loud. It was steady, built in the way she poured his coffee each morning, and the way he left a fresh wildflower on the windowsill every Friday. It was in the porch rail he carved smooth for her to lean on, and the way her hand always found his without needing to look. They grew old, not suddenly, but gently. Lines deepened around their eyes and their steps slowed, but the peace between them only deepened. One spring morning, Nella stood in the doorway, watching the sun rise over the ridge. Cade came to stand behind her, his hand resting over hers. "Still think you might have gone to Texas?" he asked. She leaned into him. "I went farther. I found home." And they stayed rooted, steady, deeply loved, just as they'd chosen to be, always.